How is it possible that a driver with a completely damaged car, fighting just to survive in the last lap, ends up being punished as if he had cheated? Because what happened to Charles Leclerc at the 2026 Miami GP is not just a 20-second penalty, it is a decision that unleashed the total fury of Ferrari, which left Frédéric Vasseur completely exposed against the FIA, and that could forever change the way the rules are interpreted in Formula One. What you are about to see is not just a mistake, it is not just a penalty. It is the exact moment where Ferrari feels that a race is being taken away from the table, completely ignoring what really happened on the track. And believe me, when you understand every detail, none of this is going to seem fair to you. The 2026 Miami Grand Prix did not begin as a tragedy for Ferrari, but little by little it transformed into a perfect storm that ended up exploding in the hands of Charles Leclerc and, above all, Frédéric Vasseur. Because what seemed like a controlled race within what the SF26 could offer hit a much deeper problem. A car that, when pushed to the limit, simply does not respond in a predictable way. And that, in Formula One, is a time bomb. From the first laps, Leclerc remained in the fight, managing pace, tires and strategy within a scenario where Ferrari was clearly not the fastest, but competitive enough to fight for important positions. It wasn't a brilliant race, but it was one of those where damage is minimized, where scoring solid points is the real goal. However, everything changes when the pressure increases, when the race enters its decisive phase and the drivers begin to push every inch of the car. This is where the SF26 begins to show its most dangerous side. We are not talking about a simple lack of rhythm, we are talking about a car that in extreme conditions loses stability, loses coherence in its aerodynamic behavior, and forces the driver to constantly drive on the verge of error. Leclerc, who had been taking risks throughout the season with positive results, pushes again. But this time the car does not respond the same. And then comes the key moment, the last lap, the total pressure, the direct fight, and a failure that changes everything. The active aerodynamic system does not act as it should. The car loses stability at a critical point on the circuit and Leclerc ends up against the wall. It's not just any accident, it's the beginning of chaos. Because from that moment, Ferrari is no longer competing, it is surviving. What is truly important is not just the impact but what comes after. The car is left damaged, completely unbalanced, with a clear inability to turn correctly to one side. Leclerc finds himself in an extreme situation. Either he tries to get that car to the finish line by any means possible, or he abandons. And this is where the controversy begins to build that will end up exploding minutes later. Every curve becomes a physical challenge. Every braking is an unknown. The Ferrari does not respond, it does not turn, it does not obey. And in that context, Leclerc makes decisions that are not strategic. They are instinctive. He begins to cut areas, to deviate from the ideal line, not to save time but to avoid losing control completely. It's a driver trying to tame a broken car in the final meters of a race that is already out of control. Meanwhile, from the wall, Ferrari watches with maximum tension. There are no complex orders, no strategy to execute. There is only one mission: reach the goal. Because even in that state, points are still vital in a championship that does not allow mistakes. And at that moment, no one within the team is thinking about a sanction. Nobody imagines that what they are seeing will be interpreted in a completely different way by the FIA. Leclerc crosses the finish line. 6th position. A career saved from disaster. One of those performances where the pilot makes the difference in impossible conditions. But what Ferrari does not know at that moment is that everything is already being analyzed, reviewed, questioned. And that the real race, the one decided in the offices, has just begun. Because while Leclerc breathes a sigh of relief after surviving, the FIA is already preparing a decision that will not only change the result, but will ignite one of the biggest controversies of the 2026 season. But if what happened on the track was already chaotic, what comes next is directly the point where everything breaks between Ferrari and the FIA. Because while Charles Leclerc was still processing one of the most difficult laps of his career, while the team was internally celebrating having saved a 6th place that seemed impossible, in parallel, the stewards were already building a completely different narrative. A cold, technical narrative, disconnected from the real context that was experienced on the track. The investigation begins almost immediately. Telemetry, onboard cameras, GPS data. Leclerc's every movement is analyzed to the millimeter. But here's the problem. The FIA is not evaluating the intention, it is evaluating the result. And from that perspective, what they see is a driver who leaves the track on multiple occasions, who cuts lines, who apparently obtains a sustained advantage. They are not seeing a driver with a broken car. They are seeing a repeated violation of the regulations. And at that point, the decision begins to take shape. The stewards rely on Article B 1.8.6 of the sporting regulations, a rule that in theory is clear. You cannot leave the track and gain an advantage. But what they ignore or decide not to consider sufficient is the mechanical context of the Ferrari. Because although they recognize that there was a problem, they conclude something that completely turns Ferrari on. That problem does not justify the driver's actions. That phrase changes everything. Because at that moment, the FIA establishes a very dangerous precedent. Even if your car is damaged, even if you cannot control it properly, you are still responsible for staying within the track limits as if everything were working perfectly. An interpretation that, from Ferrari's point of view, borders on absurdity in a category where total control of the car is not always in the hands of the driver. The sanction comes like a sharp blow. 20 seconds added to the final time. It is not a minor penalty, it is not a warning, it is a decision that completely destroys Leclerc's result. From 6th to 8th. 2 lost positions in a championship where each point can define a season. And this is where everything inside Ferrari explodes. Frédéric Vasseur does not understand it, or rather he does not accept it. Because from their perspective, the FIA has completely ignored the reality of the situation. They have not judged an exceptional case as such, they have treated it as a standard violation. And that is what infuriates the team the most, the total lack of contextual criteria. For Ferrari, this is not only an unfair sanction. It is a clear sign that the regulations are being applied without sensitivity, without sporting interpretation, without understanding what it really means to drive a damaged Formula One to the limit. The feeling within the team is that there was no right option for Leclerc. If he continued and left, he was sanctioned. If he abandoned, he lost everything. Meanwhile, Leclerc receives the news with a mixture of frustration and resignation. Because he knows that he made an initial mistake, he recognizes it, he doesn't hide. But he also knows that what he did next was the only thing possible at that moment. And that is where his contained rage is born. Not because of the accident, but because of the consequence that he considers completely disproportionate. The paddock begins to divide. Some defend the FIA's strict decision, arguing that the rules are clear. Others, however, see exactly the same thing as Ferrari. A rigid application that ignores context and punishes a situation that should have been evaluated differently. And without many realizing it at the time, this is not just the end of a career. It is the beginning of a much bigger conflict. Because Ferrari is not going to forget this. And the FIA has just opened a door that can have much deeper consequences for the remainder of the 2026 season. And then we reach the point where everything stops being a simple controversy and becomes an open rift between Ferrari and the FIA. Because after the sanction, after the fall in the classification, after that direct blow to the points, what really remains is a feeling that within Ferrari weighs more than any result. That of having been judged without understanding, without context, without sporting justice. Frédéric Vasseur holds nothing back. His stance is firm, almost defiant. For him, what happened in Miami is not a debatable interpretation of the regulations. It is a clear error of judgment. And the most serious thing from his point of view is that this decision exposes a structural problem. The FIA is applying complex rules of an extreme sport as if they were absolute rules, with no room for exceptional situations. Because here is the bottom line of the conflict. Formula One is not a controlled environment. It is a discipline where cars fail, where drivers react in thousands, where there is not always a correct option. And Ferrari feels the FIA completely ignored that reality. That turned a survival situation into a deliberate violation. Leclerc, for his part, represents the most human side of this entire story. He doesn't raise his voice like his boss, but his message is just as powerful. He takes responsibility for the initial mistake, yes, but he makes it clear that what came next was not a choice. It was an inevitable consequence. And there's the breakdown. He feels like he was punished for trying to finish the race instead of quitting. And that completely changes the perception of everything. Because if drivers begin to understand that they cannot manage damage without being penalized, then the sport enters a dangerous zone. One where competitive logic is broken. Where finishing a race in extreme conditions can be more punishing than retiring. The paddock begins to react more strongly. It is no longer just a technical debate, it is a discussion about the very essence of the regulation. Teams, analysts, and fans are beginning to question the same thing. To what extent should the FIA be rigid? Where is human judgment in decisions that depend on the context? And while all this grows, Ferrari takes note. Because this doesn't end in Miami. This leaves a mark, a distrust, a tension that will accompany every future decision, every investigation, every contact with career management. The relationship is affected, And in a championship where details are everything, that can be as dangerous as any mechanical failure. Because what Charles Leclerc and Frédéric Vasseur experienced was not only the loss of 2 positions, it was the feeling that, at a critical moment, the sport stopped understanding itself. That an extreme situation with a damaged car, with a driver fighting to stay on the track, was judged as if everything occurred in perfect conditions. Ferrari doesn't just get angry because of the punishment, he gets angry because of what it represents. By an FIA that, in this case, decided to apply the regulations without interpreting the context, without assessing the seriousness of the moment, without differentiating between a sought advantage and a reaction forced by the circumstances. And that's what makes this episode so important. Leclerc is left with the frustration of having given everything to save an impossible race, and still come out hurt. Vasseur with the certainty that this cannot be repeated without consequences. And the FIA with a decision that, although legally defensible, leaves too many doubts in the air. Miami wasn't just another race. It was the point where Ferrari felt they crossed a line. And when that happens in Formula 1, the consequences are never just a sanction. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.